Clubhouse.
Welcome to Decorating the Set from Hollywood to your home with your hosts, Beth Kushnick and Caroline Daley.
Hey, Beth.
Hey, Caroline.
We are finally getting to the point in this world where we get to get back to these live events in our life. No more Zoom weddings, no more virtual fashion shows, no more any of that kind of stuff. We get to finally start being in person again. And to be honest with you, Beth, I don't know how to do it. Do you?
I do, and I'll tell you why.
Tell me.
I think I still remember, as a set decorator, I have to actually replicate real life events in my film and TV world. So there's a lot of crossover. And, we're going to get to events and parties and certainly talk about weddings, because I've just done 2 of them recently that have been in the project I'm currently working on, and very, very different kinds of weddings. I hope that brings us a new audience of people who are interested in real event planning and, how a set decorator approaches something like a wedding, because a wedding is the perfect scenario to express you and your partner's character. So there's a lot of crossover here.
That's so true. I hadn't really thought about that, but 100% you want to have your own personality, your own mark on your event. And this is a time. So if you're an event designer, if you're someone who is a bride, if you are helping out a bride, if you're helping plan a wedding in any type of way, this is the episode for you guys. So for sure, if you have questions after you listen to this, please make sure to hit us up on Instagram and ask questions, and we will be happy to answer some things for you. So Beth, let's jump into this.
I find myself as a set decorator in scenarios where one day during the week I might be dressing a prison cell, the next day I could be dressing a funeral home, and the next day I could be doing a huge wedding. There are a lot of crossover elements and items that I have to think about. With it being so busy, and with weddings especially now being booked for the first time in a couple of years, I've experienced my own supply chain issues and problems just getting things ready for set in the last couple of weeks. So the first thing that I would say is, of course, there's a lot of planning that goes into it. But as a set decorator shooting a TV episode every 8 or 10 days, we don't really have that kind of time. So I have a couple of tricks that I use and pull together to put together a certain kind of look. And I think I tend to, of course, go with how the wedding or the event is scripted. For instance, I just did a really, really traditional scene with flowers and a runner, and we were in a church space, and it was a dream sequence. So there were a lot of things to consider about the palette and what the wedding dress was going to look like and the colors, and even still in COVID, how many extras you can have in a scene. So this is something that goes back to how do we make, let's say, the room look full, when we can only use 30 extras because there has to be distance between everybody on set. I have a whole new way of approaching that kind of work. But the first thing everybody needs to do is really start off with, who are you? What's your character? Who are you as a couple? Who are you as 2 individuals? And what do you want this event to be?
I love that, because every family is different and there's so many things to consider. Like you said, your guests, head count, but also just, how casual are you? How formal are you? What do you want it to be? Do you just want it to be a big party, or is it more about the religious aspects, or, what part is the most important to you?
The next big consideration is budget. First, you're going to know how many people are going to be a part of the event. that informs where the event's going to take place. Is it going to be a backyard event? Is it going to be in a rented space? Can you even find a space that's available? As a set decorator, we work in conjunction with location managers who are always out there searching for great places for us to shoot, locations that have things like easy load-ins and load-outs for the crew, that have a couple of days so we have enough time to prep and shoot and wrap. Just this weekend, we were working to wrap a location that quickly had another event after we made an actual restaurant and an office and shot a whole scene on a rooftop, all in one location. The location issue is something very important. Can you have your ceremony and your after party at the same place?
We had an experience where it was such an amazing bar setting. It was like a bar restaurant kind of area. And it was so beautiful with stained glass and all this stuff. But it was so poorly lit for where the bride and groom were actually exchanging vows that I felt terrible after the fact. I was like, oh my gosh, how could anyone really see them up there? But it was those are things that people don't necessarily think about. You walked into the bar and you thought, this is such a cool vibe, and they didn't stop to think, does this venue actually allow my guests to see where we are? And it's dim.
You know how much I love the lighting.
Yes, they were all about Tiffany lamps everywhere, which were beautiful, but not a ton of light.
Right. In that particular instance, there are ways in which you can enhance the lighting with the most simple LED puck lights, little, lights that you put in your closet, little lights that come from the floor up and shoot light up. You plugging a couple of those into a venue, certainly you don't want to be the person, if that beautiful bar only had stained glass lamps, maybe you see what the wattage of the light bulbs are even in them. There are questions that can be asked. There are things that you can look into. And it's similar to when I go and see a location and kind of analyze what has to leave the location for my stuff to come in, what I can make use out of. Are there great murals in a particular venue that you want to riff off of? Are there big paintings that, say, feature a certain kind of flower? And then you decide, wow, I'm going to continue that theme using both the architecture of the location where you're getting married and using how the place is dressed. Some of these big wedding halls that are intrinsically glitzy, walking in, you might want to play into that theme, or you might want to tamp that down and allow that glitz to happen just within the walls of the room, and you don't want to add to it.
And that's a good thing to remember, right? That you can manipulate the space that you have. Don't feel like, oh, this space is too much this or not enough that. Take it for what it is and then dial it up or dial it back.
Yeah, and that's all in the planning phase. And it's something to think about. So, we categorize it, right? We categorize a set. So first, we've got the floor plan, the furniture. Then, we move to the lighting. Then we move to the top layer of dressing, whether that's the linens, and then, of course, the flowers. Again, throughout this whole entire situation, you've got to consider who you're designing for yourself. What's your character? What are you as a couple? And what is the kind of palette that you're drawn to? If anything, what your theme is. How can you enhance your theme? I always like to do a kind of layered look in an eclectic situation. So I'm not really a fan of taking that theme all the way to the max, but listen, that is something that people really like to do to make an event like a wedding memorable. There are so many ways and at so many different economic price points to achieve this kind of, it's really like just living in your house and all the things that we've talked about, where you place the furniture, the lighting, the window treatments, thinking about this kind of situation in a venue, even if it's a tent in your backyard, what kind of ambiance do you want to create? And there are just unlimited possibilities.
I think one thing that I've heard a lot of brides show concern about is what should I spend my money on? What gives me the biggest bang for my buck? And I can imagine when you're doing weddings on set, you have to consider like what's going to make a wedding really pop on camera, really, have that moment, whatever that moment is, whether it's when, the bride and groom are, up in front of everybody and their backdrop behind them, whatever the thing is that's going to be like a bam, that was like memorable moment. How do you sort of deal with that both on set, and then how could you recommend things for people in person?
I would say it is pretty interesting how far party rental resources have come in terms of carrying a wide array of everything from rustic chic to completely streamlined and modern pieces of furniture and different light up pieces. Like I just used a light up bar. Those are all things that add to the ambiance. Obviously, the first thing I would think of is this a day event or a night event? Or is this a day into night event? Maybe there's a situation where the lighting really takes on a whole new backdrop for what's happening as an event goes from early evening. Now the days are longer and it doesn't get dark until later, but that's another thing to put on your hit list of considerations. What is my space going to be like at 5 p.m. and then at 9 p.m. when it's dark? Those are all things that really count, and I think they make people feel comfortable. When you see and hear what people complain about, it tends to always be how loud the music is,
oh my God, yes.
how buggy an area is, how temperature really affects people.
I'm going to throw out some more. I feel like lack of bathrooms is an issue, especially if you have an outdoor event and people are utilizing like some sort of rental bathroom situation. That's like a whole thing. And lack of seating. Like when people just expect, especially if you have like grandmas and stuff like that. We got an invitational wedding where it was just going to be like bar pub tall tables with no chairs. Like you were just expected to mill around. And we're like what is 95-year-old grandma supposed to do? She can't do that, and there was just no real thought about like, what's the variety of guests that I have coming, and do I have comfortable seating? Can people see?
Yes, sight lines are critically important. Well, of course.
They have like a table that's like in the hallway. You're like, that didn't work.
It's really what the camera sees. That's what I'm always considering. Yeah, of course, it's what your guests see. Even in a speakeasy set that I've just worked on, we have multiple different kinds of seating. When you take into account when you're shooting the height of an actress or an actor, plus what it feels like for them to move into that kind of chair. And when you consider that your guests are most likely dressed up, which in today's world, considering that we all live in our pajamas, basically, it is a kind of big deal. You want people to be comfortable. Those are also elements that I know event planners, wedding planners consider, and you can do that on your own. There are so many opportunities to look at things on Instagram, look at things online. And now there are all these beautiful photos of destination weddings. And even if that's something that you can't afford, all of these countries, Italy and Paris and, amazing places that you could go and have a destination wedding on a farm, and magnificent food and wine and all that stuff, that may not be something that you can even, want to think about in terms of affording. But there are so many inspirational ideas. We've talked about the color of the year, Very Perry, that beautiful cornflower blue that I love. I just today when I was looking at things, I saw like a whole palette for a wedding in this most beautiful bluish lavender, from literally showing lavender, beautiful bunches of lavender, to lavender macaroons, to some tulle and some tablecloths that were just the lightest hint of lavender. That palette really, really, really looked incredible in an outdoor setting. So that's another thing to think about, what your color palette is. Are you inside or out? It's always so great to continue to replicate nature outside in whatever setting that you're doing. For one of the weddings that I just did, we used very unusual materials. We used grasses in our floral arrangements. We took beautiful different kind of large leaves and we spray painted them copper, and we mixed that copper color because weddings are traditionally silver or gold, but this concept of copper with the most beautiful blush colored roses, just like a hint of blush rose and some orchids, it just did the trick. I mean, it really pulled everything together, and that I used for a more rustic wedding. So I mixed that with big farm tables and wooden chairs, and it was a more casual event. And, in terms of spending money, there was a situation where we did the party rental and we got those rustic tables and chairs, but we went much smaller on the flowers, and we did things like a garland that ran down the center of the table with small clusters of flowers. Not everything has to be these ornate flower canopies hanging from the ceiling.
Or those ones where you can't see the person across the table from you. I dislike those a lot.
That is the biggest no-no of all times.
Literally was at an event last night and took the centerpiece and set it on the floor.
Yeah,
because I couldn't talk across the table and it was making me crazy.
Mm-hmm. And then, I also will admit, I hate to see those little goldfish floating in the vases.
The betas?
Yeah, the betas.
You're like, I see you went with a beta arrangement
Moms
this
don't
time.
like to see the betas, right? We all remember our life with the first beta.
Those betas.
But, there's so many ways to go, from jewel tones to copper, as I said, being something, the smallest little touch of nature. I don't care if it's a terrarium on the table, whatever it is, just that little bit of life brings up all of this stuff. And you can go with the cleanest palette, just cotton white tablecloths. It's just how the lighting happens. There are incredible LED battery operated table lamps now that are just amazing. I mean, they're thin, they're small. You can see who's at the table over them. They cast this beautiful glow.
Perfect for selfies and pictures around the table, which all your guests will appreciate.
Absolutely. Even if you have a short prep time, like a set decorator, I would say the best thing to do is to just put together your lookbook. When we get a script in my office, myself and my assistant and production designer, we riff off maybe one inspiring photo, and that leads us to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing after that. And an hour or two later, okay, what's available at a prop house and what's available at a party rental place and what's the best flatware to choose or the best place settings to choose that now take on that next layer of where we're going with this look that we're creating. It can happen very quickly. It can all start to come together. And even if you don't feel confident about it, I promise you, I'm always here to answer your questions. I feel like maybe come May and June, we'll get a lot of questions about weddings, which I hope we do, because I can easily direct and help anyone kind of pull that together, because in reality, there aren't that many moving parts.
That's good to know. Like everyone who's listening to this, and when you're feeling overwhelmed, really like just break it down for me, Beth. What are the like, maybe, I don't know, is it top 3, top 5 like moving parts
I'd
that
say
you're
the
really
top
dealing
5
with?
moving parts are first the venue. What you get as your choices from that venue. Is it a tent in your backyard, so every choice has to be made? Or is it a true wedding venue where they insist that you use their caterer, their florist, and all of that? And I'm going to talk about that situation in a minute. Then I would say the next thing is your palette and the theme, or, what kind of vibe you're trying to create. Then the subcategories of how to create that: the flowers, the lighting, the table linens, the china and flatware. And then really, it's the food, because in the end, it's like, what do you leave your guests with? What do people leave with? I don't think I would encourage people to spend their money on a gift for guests. I don't think that's necessary. I think attending a wedding is, you've given them the experience and they love and care about you, and that's why they're there. So I wouldn't spend money on little parting gifts.
Right. Little favors.
I think I've heard many a time how people appreciate, even later in the evening, that, another round of food choices, or a candy bar, or, something was passed around. It's, even cigars or something that becomes a part of the experience. I don't think people need to take home a tangible item. I would cross that right off my budget list.
One of the things that we've seen is at the end of the night, them actually giving out like bagged to go like cheeseburgers.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Little cheeseburgers, because you're trying to sop up that alcohol, right? That
Yep.
you had. And you're hungry because it was like 5 hours ago you had dinner.
Exactly.
And all that. And you're right. Like that puts a smile on your guest's face more than some trinket that literally is going to get tossed in a drawer somewhere.
And usually I think people who do their own stuff for a wedding, they spend so much time on that, tying ribbons and putting things together. So I would definitely back burner that idea. I want to go back though to choosing a venue where you're your hand is forced, that it's their caterer, it's their florist, it's their furniture or party rental company. And listen, there are many places that have that. And the positive thing about that is that they have it for efficiency. That company that they work with, that florist, knows how to get in and out of that venue, knows how to deal with that kitchen. That definitely is something that should give you a lot of encouragement. What I would do is try to buck the system a little bit. Just have this vision of how, when I purchased my first sofa, I went to a company that is no longer in existence to purchase my first sofa, but all they do is make sofas. And of course, they try to sell you the sofa as is on the floor. This was a place that made sofas, and I went to the book of fabric, and I went to the absolute back of the book. The person who was helping me said, "Oh, nobody uses that fabric." And I said, "That's the one for me." Truly, I will tell you that sofa lasted me 25 years. That sofa worked in my home, and that sofa got more compliments probably than any piece of furniture that I've ever purchased. What I'm saying is, if one of these wedding factory venues, as some people refer to them, is saying, we always use silver, I would say, don't use silver. Just try to still bring who you are into the parameters of what you're being given.
Try to break out of that cookie cutter feel for sure,
Exactly.
right? Because if everyone in your area is using the same types of venues, then, everyone's already seen it done that way. So really do search outside what they normally do.
Because wouldn't it be great if some of your friends attended a wedding there and thought, oh, I know exactly what that wedding's going to be like. I know exactly what that wedding's going to look like.
And frankly, how much it costs and how much everything else, because they've all seen the same book.
And then they walk in, oh, mind blown. Everyone there uses silver or gold, and you went white or you went blush, whatever, anything to kind of amp it up. And I think the other situation is if you can possibly feel, I guess, confident enough and supported enough. And I tell you that it works, that when you just go off the beaten path a little bit. I am very restrictive about what flowers I use for what character and flowers on set in general. And, I never bring in flowers that have a really heavy scent. And I try not to repeat myself in terms of the color and the design and the palette and everything. So just thinking a little bit outside the box and not doing the most traditional things. And, there are plenty of other materials. There are ways to think about huppas and canopies with fabric and again, save money because, in the end, I would put my money in terms of decor into where everybody is going to be spending the bulk of their time at a wedding, which is, hopefully on the dance floor and at the meal.
So where do you come down on this, Beth? I've heard this both ways. I've heard people say, your focus should be on your guests and making sure that everybody's comfortable and it's good food and, that they're having a good time versus plenty of other people I've heard be like, this is my special day and what I want and what it should look like for me. That's like the most important thing. Where do you fall down on that?
I really think that focusing on the guests does what the whole point of sharing the event is. I think having the kind of wedding that you want to have, let's say you want blasting loud music and, a third of your guest list is over 50 or 60, whatever. I think you have to really think about that. I know a lot of people who have had a big party for all their friends and a small intimate wedding. That's the other thing in this new pandemic through post-pandemic time. There are a lot of different ways to celebrate a couple coming together. It's not just about destination weddings anymore. You can go get married in a ceremony on the beach, in your town, if you live in a coastal town, and then have a dinner in a restaurant. You can think about closing a small restaurant, say for 40, or booking a private room for that amount of people. So especially in COVID times and nobody wants to have an event and be a spreader, I think everybody is just intrinsically thinking about their guests now because, we have parameters that are different than in the past. We're talking to people who have reasonable budgets that, also want to figure out the most cost-effective way to do things.
So speaking about cost-effective way of do things, I know for you, you're not going to be creating every single thing that we see on our TV sets. I know that you're going to be renting, you're going to be going to prop houses. What types of things like that are accessible to people at home that you also use?
Well, certainly this concept of meeting with a florist, and it's almost like mixed media, mixed materials, things that are not necessarily expensive, flown in from Holland flowers. There's plenty of places to order multiples of certain vases of things that are easy. Like, you take a leaf and line the vase and it looks like an upscale arrangement. I do tend to think that people seem to criticize florals often from weddings, that it wasn't enough flowers, it wasn't lush enough. There's another way in which, I would not feel pressured to, have flowers at every aisle where people are sitting. Those kinds of things, flowers in the back of chairs and things where the money just accrues, the budget just goes up and up and up. In the end, not really bang for your buck. I would put everything through my own budget processor, kind of, like, is this going to give us the bang for the buck? I'm having some light up centerpieces made for a scene that's coming up, and they're expensive, and I just thought I started out with wanting 8. I got the budget back. I thought, I better do 6. And then I got the budget back again. And, and now I'm doing 4, but it's going to read, lighting these battery operated table lamps, and the reason for those in the film business and anywhere is because you don't have to run cords to plug anything in. So you don't have to cut through tablecloths. In the old days, we used to put table lamps on every single table in every restaurant scene, no matter where we went to shoot on location, even if it was a real restaurant and not a restaurant we were making. And that was always a budget buster because we would have to buy the linens to cut the hole for the line, the zip cord to the lamp to the electricians running all the cables, and then we had to hide the cables. And now there's battery operated lights, so we're all advancing there. But that's a place where things tend to be important and people tend to be opinionated as the couple, what their cake looks like, because maybe you're going to freeze your wedding cake and have it in your life for the next 10 years or however long it's going to last. There are those things, just like when I'm doing like a high-low interior, I spend money on window treatments. I spend money on lighting. I may not buy the most expensive sofa. Those are all decisions that one decision informs the next. That's what I'm saying. Like, when I'm going to look at rental furniture for an event and I find that one particular wooden chair is, $5 more a chair. Well, that $5 times 50 people or 100, that adds up. Each decision, it's kind of like, when you set up dominoes, one falls on the next, and kind of keeps informing the next decision. And that's what I would really encourage people to do, is allow that to happen instead of just starting with all your decisions made. This is how much I'm going to spend on flowers. This is how much I'm going to spend on the venue. This is how much I'm going to spend on the furniture. This is how much I'm going to spend on the food. As a set decorator, I am always kind of moving and shifting my concept, my budget, all the things, because I allow one decision of availability to inform the next. How quickly can I get something? Is it in stock? And unfortunately, everybody in the real world has to deal with this too, because there are still, a ton of supply chain issues. I would say to people, use your connections. If you know someone who has a good relationship with a florist, take down that name, have that meeting. If you know someone does a lot of parties and has a good connection at a party rental place, try to kind of trade off that stuff. That's where a venue that's an all-inclusive venue can also help you.
Yeah, we've also had luck in throwing different fundraising events, in talking to the venue about what other events were going on around our event. And what we found was that we were able to connect with some of the other events and actually share centerpieces and say like, hey, like you guys are going like the day before us, and you guys are using, these little candles or whatever, but we're going to be using these at ours. And so we could kind of like share up on the expenses a little bit
That
because
is
they were
beyond brilliant.
it
That's
really worked out
incredible.
nicely. And then also like during a lot of like natural holidays when people decorate, maybe it's going to be a springtime event, or maybe it's
Right.
going to be around the
Christmas.
holidays.
Yep.
Yeah. Like my sister, the entire church was already decorated in poinsettias all over the place. So there was no room for her to really add extra flowers, but she could just use what was naturally already decorated for that time of year and make it look really pretty. So, consider your time of year and what else is already happening, and try to work with other people within. I mean, this is funny. For my own wedding, they actually double booked the venue and ended up asking us to push back, which at first was, like, oh my God, horrifying, But one of my favorite things is when small things go wrong, because I love to ask for extras after that. I'm like, I can be very understanding about this, but what are you going to give me for free? Because this happened. And so they ended up moving my event at a certain point in time out to this large clubhouse kind of setting where we basically had like a secondary reception then. Like we already had a sit down dinner, but then we had like a dance club kind of feel for the second one. And they moved our guests with their little vans and their little golf carts and all that kind of stuff. And it turned out to be awesome. It made it seem like we had this like really elaborate event when really it was a double booking that I just didn't scream about. I just said, how can we make this work? What can we do?
Well, that's the other thing, is that right now, I mean, everybody is in so much competition to rebook and get settled for all these things, whether it's clothing or flowers or the venue. You can't go in guns a-blazing in these times, because what's anybody going to say to you is, yeah, well, move aside. There's someone right behind you who wants to book a wedding here. So,
Exactly.
You really have to tamp down, I think, in a lot of ways, normal expectations. You might not be able to get the flowers of your dreams and all that kind of stuff, because things are tight. I mean, it is hard to pull off on a daily basis. Believe me, even my most connected vendors that I deal with for years and years and years, where I spend a lot of money, it just doesn't exist. I mean, when you are in my situation, in a set decorator situation, and having to turn things around quickly, see so much out of stock. And then what happens is we order things and they're promised for a certain date. All of a sudden, there's that updated shipping bad news email, which, I purposely have those emails go to somebody else because
nice.
I just can't take it. But then that person has to give me the bad news.
Oh no.
It's just every day, is a bit of a challenge. So listen, I think the bottom line is this is the time and the arena to have your best attitude and
see it as an opportunity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if what everyone else is doing is not available, awesome. That means that now you have a chance to do something different. And I know you were talking about in several other podcasts where flowers are being replaced by other natural objects that people use now. So what kind of things can you use instead?
In some of the arrangements that I did for this one wedding scene that we had, they were actually, it had to be of a large size, and they were just too heavy to withstand. The weight was just too much in the vases that we had. We were going for a very specific look where we could shoot in a direction where it would hide certain people. It was a very complicated setup and create shafts of light and all kinds of stuff. It was a difficult decision, but in the end, using artificial flowers in that particular scenario, up at the podium of the church, nobody was getting really close. And Obviously, for being on film, it worked, but there are other things. There are plants, there are little fruit trees, beautiful orange trees, and, it depends on where you live and what you can get. But there are other ways to create a centerpiece. Doing this concept of long communal tables with, just a runner down the table and small little pockets of flowers. We call them jewel cups, like mint julep cups. And they come in silver and gold, and they come in amber, beautiful, different colored jewel tone cups. And you just put a few stems in there by keeping things small and understated, and yet repeating it multiple times. Like, let's say on a table for 10, there are 15 or 20 of those. It's a way to save money. B, it's a way to not have things in people's faces. C, it's a way to give more guests something to walk away with, just a nice little remembrance. There are ways to make it more manageable and more accessible. Then I think it informs kind of your feeling about it. What's the worst that can happen if you've got 20 little cups on a table and one of them breaks? It's not like you're losing the one big arrangement for that table. So, everyone has to be kind of open to things are gonna go wrong. That happens to me often. I'm only as good as my vendor, right? So even when something does show up and it shows up on time, what if it's wrong? What kind of mode do I go into to fix things quickly, like nobody knows? And that's that old never let them see you sweat. You just improvise and think on your feet. And, during this supply chain issue time, during pandemic time, I really have readjusted my expectation. And I would say to anybody who's planning any kind of event, especially a wedding, it's still going to be a long time before everything is up and running the way that it used to be. And even the way it used to be, there are always these things that can happen. And I don't know, maybe it's, at this point in my life, I just feel like, I would counsel everyone to take it in and not let it take over you, or your special day.
100%. So you guys, that's a lot of information we've just thrown at you. And certainly I hope you were taking notes. If not, the lucky thing is it's a podcast. You can just start it right back from the beginning. But Beth, if you had a couple of really important takeaways that you really want people to just not forget as they're going forward, certainly staying flexible, looking for maybe the non-traditional routes here or there, the unused, the more unique things.
Go off the beaten path. And that's also a way in which, when you were saying a lot of people getting married want to do it for themselves. I mean, listen, if you want hot pink and orange and that's been your wedding dream, I wouldn't tamp that down, to please your parents or anyone else. I would represent who you are, who your character is, who you are as a couple. Go for that. I would be really open right now to all kinds of options and possibilities. And as I said, I would really let certain things inform my decisions and not be rigid. Don't go in, I must have, or it has to be this way. There are a lot of experienced event planners, wedding planners, who have these connections and concepts. And what you have to trust is the fact that they've had their successes and their failures. When they say, oh, the timing of that isn't good because, then the hors d'oeuvres get cold or something happens or the flowers wilt and tulips are bad. And, I've had my own personal experiences on set. I don't use tulips on set, because the hot lights go and the tulips say, I want to lie down.
Right. They
instead of
limp over.
standing up. Oh my God. I mean, I've placed flowers. Yeah, I've placed, vases and vases of flowers and come in the next morning to shoot. And it's, it's bad news. The more that you are open to these kinds of experiences that professionals have had or family members or friends have had, just take it all in stride.
So Beth, now that we've got all of our brides and our event planners busily doing their work, tell us a little bit about what work you're working on.
Well, I'm going to save my current project for another time, but I will tell you the great announcement was that season 2 of Bridge and Tunnel, the Ed Burns show on Epics, is actually premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival and will be available to be seen on Epics in July. So that's thrilling. And
that's very exciting.
If anyone has any questions, wedding or event related, if anyone needs my help with their prison cell or their party, I'm here for you.
You know how to assemble it all, make it look amazing.
I do. I hope.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Decorating the Set from Hollywood to Your Home at Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast, or wherever you listen to our podcast. Please leave a 5-star rating. It helps us a lot in promotion of the show. 5 stars, people. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, producer Mike here. Don't forget to submit your reviews to Instagram, Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you leave us a 5-star rating and review, we'll read it on air, just like 20 Brentons did when he wrote, "Beth, thank you for your talent, originality, passion, and your spirit. You really make a difference. It's shining through your art. Lots of love." 5 stars. Thank you so much, 20 Brentons. Guys, submit to Beth's Instagram at Beth Kushnick, Pod Clubhouse's Instagram at Pod Clubhouse, or like I said, Apple Podcasts, podclubhouse.com. We have a bunch of different ways you can reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and read it on air. Thanks so much, and thank you for listening. Decorating the Set from Hollywood to Your Home is an original Pod Clubhouse production. Recorded, edited, and produced at Pod Clubhouse Studios. For more information, please visit us online at podclubhouse.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Decorating the Set at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening.